question I find myself asking quite often, and even trying to answer on occasion, goes something like this. How can we reconcile a belief in a good God with a world that is not often good, with a world that is broken? Now, in the few short minutes I have here, there's no way I can do justice to such a complicated question, but I want to encourage you to join me in asking a related question, one that lies beneath the surface of that first one. And that is, can we separate the signal from the noise? What I mean is, can we separate those things that we can draw meaning from right now, from those situations that we can't access their meaning in our present circumstances? In this world right now, there is so much noise. In the media, in our homes, anxiety rates are spiking and fear seems to be in the driver's seat. Is there a signal in the midst of all of it? Can we even find it? There's an American statistician named Nate Silver. He's the editor-in-chief of an economics and polling site called 538. He wrote a book called The Signal and the Noise. And in it, he writes, distinguishing the signal from the noise requires both scientific knowledge and self-knowledge. The serenity to accept the things we cannot predict, the courage to predict the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Making sense of a world that is often painful likewise requires that we separate those things that we can understand from those things that we simply cannot understand right now. In C.S. Lewis's novel, The Screwtape Letters, he writes about a demon named Screwtape who's writing to a less experienced demon, his nephew, named Wormwood. He's giving him some advice about how to create chaos in the world. What is that advice? He says, we will make the whole universe a noise in the end. So how do we drown out that noise? One answer I want to suggest is silence. I'm not particularly good at this, but there was a master of silence. His name was Fred Rogers, host of the children's TV program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Writer Amy Hollingsworth shares an anecdote about a marine biologist that came to the show and wanted to demonstrate this particular species of fish that was a very loud feeder, so she dropped an underwater mic in the tank. Nothing she did could get the fish to feed, and so they were never able to capture the sound on video. The producers and the editors, of course, decided, well, we have to cut that segment. But Fred Rogers insisted. He said, keep the segment. I want to model what silence and patience looks like, especially when the promised or expected delivery of that patience is not immediately accessible. So that week, kids and parents and everyone tuned in as they waited in silence, drowning out the noise, listening for the signal. But I'm being pretty vague. What kind of a signal am I talking about? There's a lot of noise and there's a lot of pain right now. Tish Harrison Warren, in her Liturgy of the Ordinary, writes, when suffering is sharp and profound, I expect and believe that God will meet me in its midst. But in the struggles of my average life, I somehow feel I have a right to be annoyed. Are you like me, feeling both the average and the sharp pain simultaneously right now? It seems like we're being pulled in both directions. As we set aside our annoyance and learn to embrace this new normal, I want to say the signal looks something like a new life. A new life that can reorder our perspective of our present worries, a new life that promises us hope and healing. This promise is all throughout the New Testament. In Philippians 1:21, Paul writes, to me, to live is Christ. And in Colossians 3:4, Christ who is our life. And in John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And finally, in John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. These passages inspired the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer to share these words, my life is another than myself. It is Jesus Christ. This is not intended figuratively as conveying that my life would not be worth living without this other life. In this new life, there is no end, annihilation, or death. These are not the aimless ramblings of a philosophical, ivory tower thinker. On the contrary, if you know anything about Bonhoeffer, you know he mounted a resistance to the Third Reich in Germany, that he put his money where his mouth was, right? That he lived out his belief in this new life by going to his own mortal death to defend the rights and freedoms of his fellow man. I can't tell you how to reconcile a good God with a broken world all the time, but I can ask if there's something past the noise of it all, past the chaos that our minds cannot always make sense of. Is there a signal in the midst of it? Is there a signal in the skies above our heads? And if so, will you join me in looking up?